Welcome to the extra credits of Ridley Scott and Denzel Washington's Gladiator II. I'm Trey.
And I'm Kelsi.
This is our non-spoiler review of Scott's highly anticipated sequel to one of the most iconic historical epics ever made, Gladiator.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough to catch an early IMAX screening of Gladiator II just a few days ago, and it was so much fun.
It was great.
It was a great
I also
time.
was like smack in the center of this IMAX.
We were very lucky.
A beautiful experience.
There has been so much buzz around this movie, from its ambitious scale to it being like a $300 million budget to the star-studded cast and the return of Scott himself, a director who is almost 87 years old, who is bringing ancient Rome back to life at the end of his own life with his signature style and sensibilities. And much like the original Gladiator, this sequel is hyper dramatic, has a dark Shakespearean humor, and has timeless themes about power and legacy and corruption that also feel pretentious, but knowingly pretentious. So it is just a great time at the movie theater. And there's also, of course, spectacular action set pieces. So this is going to be one of the most exciting movies of the year.
Yeah, and I definitely think it will really be a crowd pleaser. It's coming out during Thanksgiving week. Like, people will love this if you loved the original Gladiator and really embrace the cheesiness.
Yes. I'm also just excited as Scott heads, you know, like I'm excited that this guy gets to make this massive blockbuster at almost 90 years old.
Yeah.
Despite his flippant interview style and like what he's been saying in interviews lately, he remains one of our favorite kind of angry grandfather directors.
Yes. Yeah.
A filmmaker who just can't stop working and who I think has delivered a serious, if not great, movie in almost every decade of the last 50 years. And you can think about Alien or Blade Runner or Thelma and Louise or American Gangster, Prometheus, Kingdom of Heaven, The Last Duel recently, and now Gladiator 2, I think deserves to be in that conversation of 10 really great films over so many years. This guy is just so prolific, relentless. He's also assembled an incredible group of artists. He has a great team who know the genre very well of historical epics. So the movie looks phenomenal. And he's really good at blending spectacle with themes of class, ambition, and just exploring like dudes trying to immortalize themselves and really critiquing those guys.
Yes,
he's really good at that.
Definitely. Yeah. We talked about this on our episode with Sean Fennessy from The Big Picture.
Yeah.
But of course, Ridley does have some sleepers. And so people kind of like talk about him because he puts out so much, you know, and he is relentless.
There's a lot that doesn't work in his filmography because he puts out so much.
Yeah, he talks about in a lot of his interviews that it would be something that would not be fun to even like take a holiday for him. He's kind of like a workaholic in that way. We appreciate that. Even some of the, you know, the ones that are not as great in his filmography. But yeah, I think you're totally right. He like has a great movie every decade. And I always come back to his filmography. Obviously, our longtime listeners know we've covered a lot of his movies because of the themes that he is interested in.
Yes, but not everyone is interested in what he's interested in. In fact, not everyone's interested in just like his style or visual flares. Like Napoleon last year was an incredibly fun movie. Yeah. It was a absurd satire on quote unquote the great man theory. Yeah. And that had a totally mixed reaction from audiences and critics. And we thought it was like perfectly fine, if not good, and had a great, you know, Thanksgiving week experience watching that movie.
Yeah. Well, I think also like part of that, to be fair, was it came around the holidays. So people were going with their families to see like a gladiator type movie and thinking that the Joaquin Phoenix character might be more so like this historical epic Maximus figure from Gladiator, instead of thinking of how Napoleon might be more so, especially with casting Joaquin Phoenix, more so a Peter Whalen type of character.
Yes, he is well, for people who don't love Prometheus or don't know Prometheus, he basically presents Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon Bonaparte as a loser for 2.5 hours. Yeah. And if you've seen the 4-hour cut, you know he does that for 4 hours. So it's a lot to sit through. But if you're down for that kind of experiment, filmmaking wise, then it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Also, if you're a fan of Denzel Washington, go see this movie because you're in for a great time. This is not, I would say this is not exactly Paul Mescal's Gladiator.
No, yeah.
This is not even exactly Ridley Scott's Gladiator film. It feels like Denzel Washington takes the reins from everybody on set about 30 minutes into the movie. And you're like, I want to see your film. And it does turn into basically his film. Like he's bringing like American Gangster, Training Day energy into ancient Rome, and he gets up into a lot.
Yeah. I think because Paul Mescal was cast in the Maximus type of role, right? The Russell Crowe character, everyone was thinking, oh, this is his movie. We're going to focus on him. I think that Ridley Scott really does a great job. And what I was kind of worried about in improving on the themes of Gladiator that felt kind of really straightforward and clear cut. He kind of complicates it more with Denzel Washington's character.
Yes.
And Denzel delivers.
Absolutely. I mean, he gives us like a powerful, morally complex performance. So he does the Denzel thing. You know, it's classic. You're going to love it. Before we dive any further, for a short time right now, we are offering our Gladiator Deep Dive episode, the original Gladiator movie, for free on Patreon. And you can access that almost 3-hour conversation where we talk about that 2000 classic. All you have to do is sign up using the link in the description of this episode. And if you sign up as a free member, you'll get to hear Kelsi and I talk about why we think Gladiator is one of the most bizarre Shakespearean melodramas we've ever seen. Yeah. Especially when you look at that movie through the lens of whatever Joaquin Phoenix is up to as Commodus. Yeah. It is a great time.
Yeah. I think Commodus, I'm excited to talk about Joseph Quinn today because
me too.
I think, I was worried also going into Gladiator 2 that the energy and the villain characters wouldn't be able to match what Joaquin Phoenix is up to in the first Gladiator.
They come close.
And they do.
Very close.
I still think Commodus is one of, Ridley's more interesting characters in a Gladiator, the original Gladiator film, which we talk about, that feels like a little bit black and white in terms of like good and evil. He's doing something interesting with the Commodus figure, I guess, there, though, that Joaquin Phoenix is also able to deliver like he is in all of his other movies.
Theatrical,
a little bit of a twisted performance. But I'm excited again, to talk about the different layers we get of a Commodus figure instead of, he could have gone the safe route, I think, in this movie.
Yeah, and he doesn't. Okay, so Gladiator 2, mostly non-spoilers here. If you don't want to know anything, highly recommend the movie. Go see it in IMAX. In fact, there are enough set pieces to demand that kind of theater experience. And frankly, just Denzel, on an IMAX screen, twiddling his thumbs and fingers and whispering and political back dealings and making deals behind the scenes. It's worth it. And on an IMAX screen, he's that compelling.
Yeah. And also I think, the original fight scenes of Gladiator were great. Yeah. But here, the sound design really was so impressive.
Especially the combat.
The fight sequences. I was like, I was like, what's going to happen?
Yes.
It was great. I got worried at the beginning because we saw some CGI effects similar to Napoleon, which, if you saw Napoleon, I didn't love, but definitely go see this. It delivers on the action, the fight sequences, the kind of cheesy strength and honor moments, and also has really fun characters and performances.
Yeah, the supporting characters make the original Gladiator timeless, and I think they do again in Gladiator 2.
Definitely.
And that's maybe a hot take for those of you who love Maximus, but we'll get to him.
Yeah.
All right, so Gladiator 2, some table setting here. This movie is set about 15 years after the original. So we're in a Rome that is on the brink of collapse toward the end of the 2nd century. And Imperial Rome faces internal unrest. There is political corruption, famine. There are civil issues that are kind of setting the stage for what audiences probably know are future external conflicts that will kind of lead to the end of the Imperial Rome as we know them. And right from the start, the tone of the sequel, I thought, felt more nuanced than the original pretty immediately for me, which I think comes down to David Scarpa's screenplay that is clearly wrestling with the original very messy Gladiator screenplay. Because as good as the original Gladiator movie is, if you know anything about the pre-production of that film and how they started shooting $100+ million production with a 20-page script with 8 different writers attached to it, but 2 to 4 of them credited. It was a wild experience. Highly recommend watching the behind the scenes of that movie.
Yeah, and we cover a lot of that on our Patreon episode too.
We did.
There's a particular fun fact though that I feel like I have to share, which is that in the improvised scenes, because they only had such a short script with the Maximus and Marcus Aurelius, great conversation at the beginning.
Yes.
There's some improv in that the strength and honor line is actually Russell Crowe's high school I guess slogan, right?
I love the idea of him just doing a football speech at a goal.
I know.
Because that's basically what it feels like. They're going to war. He has to convince them to
And
sacrifice themselves.
I think that is like the best part of the first movie is that opening sequence.
Yeah,
I know
the Germanic tribes.
But there's a moment where Paul Mescal and Connie Nielsen say strength and honor to each other in this movie, and it makes me laugh just knowing that it's just Russell Crowe's like high school like line.
Yeah. There are a few moments that made you laugh that I want to pick your brain about.
Maybe some unintentional comedy. Maybe also some Ridley kind of messing with different performances. Yeah.
So screenplay wise, I think what David Scarpa does here and Ridley Scott does here is really smart, because that original Gladiator film heavily relies on Maximus, right? And his straightforward, conventional revenge arc. And like you're saying, Russell Crowe does with it what he can, which is it's Crowe. He's a very talented actor, so he does a lot with it.
Yeah.
And the political backdoor dealings of the Senate in that original Gladiator movie, and how the ruling class was kind of falling in the mess of the Senate and their political dealings. All of that was pretty secondary to that narrative. And Scarpa and Scott give us that formulaic Maximus hero's journey once again in the sequel with Mescal's character. But more importantly, the sequel screenplay, I think, is far more interested in the more layered political drama of the narrative, where you have these moral and philosophical dilemmas of what to do with a fractured imperial Rome. And that plays the biggest role in the narrative, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most interesting aspect of it. So 30 minutes into this movie, you can tell that there's going to be a more introspective look at Rome, which adds depth to the spectacle that we already expected from Scott and that we get, delivered in Gladiator 2. Now, whether Scott and his crew actually balance those narrative beats are up for debate, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, because there are really two films in this Gladiator 2 movie, and it's not quite having an identity crisis. I won't go as far as saying that.
Yeah.
But it is very clearly struggling with what lane to choose or what lane it's most comfortable in. And I can't tell if it's a studio thing or a Ridley Scott thing, but basically, you have one half of this movie trying to echo the original hero's journey with Mescal's character, taking on this reluctant, revenge-driven role, and he's conflicted about his legacy. And this is where Connie Nielsen's character gets quite a bit to do without spoiling anything. So that half of the movie is solid, and it's certainly a sequel to the original Gladiator.
Yeah.
And the other half of the film is the half that Scott seems more invested in, that I think is great.
Yeah.
Like top 10, top 5 movie of the year in this portion of the film, which is this exploration of a crumbling empire, which features Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, Joseph Quinn, and other actors just doing the most.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that right on, do you think? Like that
definitely.
Kind of, not quite identity crisis, but there are two different narratives. Like kind of competing to be the movie that Ridley Scott wants to make.
I'm not sure that I think like it fully delivered on some of the most interesting themes, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't still a successful movie and that it was trying to be a blockbuster action piece, right?
Yeah.
But that's just like I think our personal take is that we would have rather maybe seen one of those lanes more explored.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's totally right on in terms of just the pacing and the different kind of movies that are in this one movie. I actually think the original Gladiator starts out with amazing sequences and kind of the political, settings with the different characters of Maximus and Commodus and Marcus Aurelius and Connie Nielsen's character.
And like, all of the senators who were scared of Commodus.
Yeah. So I actually think like the beginning of Gladiator, the first one, is really the most interesting part. And then it kind of lags and then we get like back to the interesting part. Here, I think I was worried going in terms of pacing in Gladiator 2 because I thought it was just going to be kind of a straightforward Paul Mescal, like, really we see that he worked out a lot for this role.
He's got muscles.
Standing.
No longer hot sad boy.
Gazing out
this time, angry sad boy.
Gazing out into the ocean, and we are just like the camera's hanging on him. So I thought it was going to be kind of just a sequel of a very straightforward Maximus to Paul Mescal line. But I do agree with you that the second half of this is such a great movie, and I think people will not expect it going into a Gladiator movie. It's like far more, it exceeded my expectations.
What's fascinating, like as Scott heads, we've seen him do this before. Like he has used his own movie IP to greenlight sequels in order to make a movie that he otherwise would not have been able to make and would not have gotten funded. Because I thought a lot about Prometheus and Covenant when watching Gladiator 2. And as far as like Scott trying to manipulate studio capital and trying to use their obsession with IP to make his David trilogy. In this case, it feels like he wants to make his Denzel movie or to continue this like cautionary tale of optimism and idealizing or romanticizing an empire, which I do think is what he's trying to do with the Maximus character and then eventually with this Paul Mescal character.
Yeah.
Because he has said that he wants to make Gladiator 3. I don't know if a 90-year-old Ridley Scott is going to be able to do that. If he does, what a legend. He already is.
He said he's already writing the script, which is like 5 pages. Also,
he's almost there.
Yeah. but also he, we were talking about this on the Alien Romulus pod. But he did announce that he has like an Alien movie in the works, right?
Hoping it's his final David movie, but that could just mean he's producing a Fede Alvarez movie again. We don't know.
We don't know.
Let's get excited. Let's just assume.
But we can hold it in our hearts as a wish, that he finishes the David trilogy and we get to see Michael Fassbender as an android again.
I would love that. But ultimately what's tough about Prometheus and Covenant is that Prometheus is one of our favorite sci-fi spectacles of the last 25 years. Covenant is a lot of fun, has some great set pieces. Arguably the scariest alien movie ever made because that first act is so horrifying. But it is really kind of messy screenplay wise because it is a movie that is trying to, it's like stuck somewhere between being a sequel to the concepts and character studies of Prometheus while trying to be a movie that needs to connect to the xenomorph lore and the alien universe to lead us up to Ellen Ripley and the Nostromo and the original Alien film. And I'm happy about both of those movies in one movie, even if they don't totally mesh well together. But that's sort of how Gladiator 2 feels. It's similarly stuck. Still glad to have it, though. Okay, let's get into what works about Gladiator 2 first, then we'll talk about what doesn't work. So what works? Denzel
Washington.
So he came to have some fun in Rome. He is playing a mysterious figure with a lot of charisma and, like I said at the top, moral ambiguity. So classic Denzel. Some might say that this is watching Training Day's Alonzo play in Rome, and I think that is apt and probably accurate, and that's really not far off. I mean, Denzel is playing easily one of the most compelling characters in either Gladiator film. And maybe in any ancient Rome movie ever. So his character's role is... It's really interesting. It's somewhat similar to Oliver Reed's Proximo from the original Gladiator film when we see him kind of watching Paul Mescal and then wanting to basically create a transactional relationship with him, which is very similar to what Proximo does with Maximus, except Washington's character is afforded a sharper edge and wit more than Proximo had, and he has more political savvy. And you learn more about Washington's backstory, his character's backstory, really slowly throughout the narrative until it's like ultimately revealed at the end, like who he really is, which added some real nice layers to his character's motivations and created a fascinating dynamic between him and the royal families of Rome as he's trying to maneuver through the Roman political landscape. So it's a lot. He's doing a lot, but just his performance alone, like set pieces aside, Paul Mescal's muscles aside, Joseph Quinn and his theatricality aside, or Pedro Pascal being amazing and a hotter Maximus, all of that aside, Denzel is worth the price of admission. Like he really is.
And I think that, his character in particular, like I would have liked to see that reveal pushed more thematically.
Agreed. I was going to bring that up too. Yeah.
But I think there's like such a great buildup of kind of like Paul Mescal's character asking, who are you? And then we get a good reveal that feels like, oh, wow, okay, this is where Gladiator 2 is meant to go.
Yes.
And I wish that was pushed further.
It takes a Hollywood ending.
Yes.
Instead of let's fully explore the Fall of Rome movie that clearly Ridley Scott wants to make.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something, again, like you said, you can tell in his Alien franchise, there was like tension there narratively versus what maybe a studio would want or green light. But at the same time, I definitely think like Denzel Washington's character is really made by his performance. Like he has so much depth because of his performance and what he's able to bring to that really like heightened tension moment in the end in particular.
Yes.
But yeah.
I mean, the scheming that he does in the background is just really special.
Yeah.
Because he's really good at going really loud in most of his movies. But what he does in the shadows in this film is really impressive. It's not something you've seen a lot from him in his career. Okay, the second best part of this movie to me, which will be unsurprising to Stranger Things fans, is Joseph Quinn. Who,
the second best thing.
I think so.
Wow, okay.
He really gets to shine in this film. And I'm not being hyperbolic by saying that Quinn is channeling Joaquin Phoenix, like we said at the top.
Yeah.
He truly is. And he is just incredibly unpredictable. And he is bringing, like I said, like a theatrical electricity into the role of one of the two twin emperors in this film. Mm-hmm. The other twin is not given as much to do. Yeah. And that actor, unfortunately, is not given a lot to do.
He's like a flat character, too, on purpose.
Totally. But Quinn is also just kind of owning the screen.
Yeah.
Anytime they're on screen together, to the point where even in moments when Denzel or Quinn are acting off of one another, I'm going, man, Joseph Quinn? Like, he's not Denzel Washington, but he's like going toe to toe with one of the most important American actors of all time.
Yeah. When you see Denzel and Paul Mescal, right, in the beginning, like acting off of one another, it's very clear. Like, we love Paul Mescal, but Denzel is in this movie. Yes. You're just very aware this is Denzel Washington's movie.
That's what it is.
But you're right. Like, when Denzel and Joseph Quinn had that first scene together, I was like, whoa, we're watching like a very serious drama.
Yeah.
Even though it's like there's comedic moments and like heightened pieces to those performances on purpose in a Gladiator, like epic historical drama. You're right. Like they were both, it felt like, you know, again, not equal performances, but that Joseph Quinn had something there. And also, you know, something that I noticed with Joseph Quinn is that the like depth that he has, I was thinking about him and Joaquin Phoenix also, but they both have like marble eyeballs, like like it looks
huge
like
eyes.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, I'm so locked into whatever they are feeling through what their eyes are emoting, and I wonder if it has something to do with that. Like Joaquin Phoenix and Joseph Quinn have like similar eyes.
It's the biggest secret to some of our loudest performers, like Jake Gyllenhaal, Lupita Nyong'o. Like massive eyes are just like they're beaming out of the screen. You're like looking at them immediately. But especially in this film, Joseph Quinn gets up to some very loud, animated, almost cartoonish like villain stuff.
Yeah.
But it still works. Like he somehow still grounds it, and it probably is a lot with the direction, the cinematography, and how they're shooting it. But he is just so much fun in this. And I think when Quinn and Denzel are on screen together, and they're whispering alongside one another or about other people, they're just so brilliant in this that they really elevate this movie to something fresh. Whereas most of the film, with Paul Mescal's character in particular, feels like it's just pulling from conventions that were already laid out for them.
Yeah. I was going to say the second best thing, although you're now convincing me that Joseph Quinn is the second best thing.
Maybe he's just on my mind because he's having such a big year because of Quiet Place Day 1.
No, but I do think
Fantastic
you're right.
Four is coming out.
I do think you're right in the depth that he's able to bring to such a kind of absurd role.
Yeah.
Like a Commodus, like
the
a
jealousy he feels for like Paul Mescal's poetry. There's just a lot.
Yeah, that scene's great. I want to talk about that. But I was going to say that Pedro Pascal is the third. Well, I guess like now tied second best thing for me.
Yes. I mean, he is certainly the biggest surprise in the movie because there's so many supporting roles in this film that I didn't think he was going to get much to do. I actually thought he would get killed off pretty early, but he is a pretty major character in this film. And, you know, I think Paul Mescal's character is probably the let's say the most uninteresting character in this film.
Yeah.
But it's really surprising when you parallel his character with Pedro Pascal's character, because Pascal's character, even though Mescal's character has to like be in conversation with Maximus, Pedro Pascal's character, I think, is most clearly in conversation with Maximus's character. He feels like an evolution of that character in many ways. Mm-hmm. Like Pascal's character is like, what if Ridley Scott just gave Maximus more depth? To me. Like, I think it's almost like what if we gave Maximus the substance? You know what I mean? Like, what if we just like transformed Russell Crowe into Pedro Pascal?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great for everyone? And it certainly feels like that. Like Pascal is playing a version of a reluctant general who is more savvy, more charming, has more depth, emotional intelligence, political savvy than what Maximus had.
Yeah, you know, that's great. I think that,
and not to totally critique Russell Crowe's performance. Like, Gladiator, Are You Not Entertained is like an iconic moment, and it's a great performance.
Yeah. But Gladiator 1 was a different movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I think you're right to point out that Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal are playing kind of like a split Maximus to make that sort of character more interesting leading into the second movie. And definitely like Pedro Pascal is, you know, he's playing like a general in the Roman army. Mm-hmm. But it's not as just like black and white of this heroic figure of like a Maximus.
Yes.
And the Paul Mescal character is able to kind of like point out those contradictions. And Pedro Pascal is also, able to...
He's humanizing him in interesting ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of empathy with the character and you really feel for him. In fact, I would say the only serious emotionality in the movie, there are a lot of people crying in this film, but the only time it really works for me is actually when no one's crying and it's just Pedro Pascal looking at kind of what he needs to do, and you're looking at his eyes and there's so much said, he's seen so much terror and he's committed so much terror and he has all this regret and he does not believe in Imperial Rome. He doesn't want to conquer Persia or India or try to. And so there is just kind of, he is supposed to be representing again, I think, the thematic tensions of what Ridley Scott is trying to get across in these gladiator films that never totally gets across. Now, what doesn't totally work? I've already stepped on it. Let's talk about the actual lead of this movie, Paul Mescal, who is known as...
Doesn't work?
No, yeah, I don't think so.
Wow, okay, I disagree.
And it's not... Paul Mescal is one of the, like I said, hot, sad boys of his generation.
Yeah.
He is an up-and-coming, great actor. He's worked in indie films. He's now worked in mainstream movies. After Sun is one of my favorite movies of the 2020s. And he is just... astonishing in that film. But in Gladiator, he is giving a strong performance, but it's such a forgettable character.
Sure.
So I'll put it more on the writing and the direction, but there is almost nothing memorable for me, about this character. And I don't about it, the character's arc, what they go through, their jokes don't land.
Yeah.
Their leadership doesn't totally land. Just not a lot works for me.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, okay. I think that Paul Mescal is still doing his best in the movies, and he really shines in the quiet moments where he's flirting with his medical doctor person, and he is able to exude this warmth in really enclosed conversations in small rooms. And that's where he is successful as an actor, like we know from After Sun.
Yes.
Appa has just joined the podcast.
Hello, Appa. Say hello to YouTube.
That's our dog. But
this will be a constant on the YouTube channel.
For sure. But I think I get what you're saying in that I turned to you at one point and I was I don't like this Uber mask, Paul Mescal role. It just doesn't feel like it suits his strengths to be flexing and looking out or beyond the horizon.
It's not him.
Yeah, be giving.
I kept going, this isn't you.
This isn't you.
Yeah.
But
why are you doing this? Yeah.
You don't need to do this.
Yeah.
It will still love you. But I think that, him
just make normal people
in
again.
this role. Kind of giving those military speeches at the beginning. And you're right, he didn't get as good a line as Russell Crowe for everyone to laugh at the beginning. They were definitely doing parallel Maximus, speeches and moments on purpose, but it
almost felt like a parody though, sometimes.
Yeah, he wasn't able to deliver on, you're right, this charismatic kind of what the knowing general kind of figure that Maximus was of commanding respect and having this quiet, stoic, traditional masculinity that we see in movies. It's Paul has other strengths of gaining respect. And it felt strange to see him play in that same mold that we used to see in the past historical epic dramas.
It felt like he was being used how Taylor Kitsch was being used in that John Carter Disney movie from a decade and a half ago. That's the guy who played Riggins in Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
And it was Paul Mescal is one of the great young dramatic actors. Why are we using him in this way? Yeah. Even in moments where he gets time to shine emotionally and he's crying and in an eternal life, Elysium, the Roman afterlife.
Yeah.
You're just kind of I'm not I'm not bought into this thinly written character. It's ultimately a very superficial character. And so this is kind of what I'm saying about the movie. Maybe it is having a little bit of an identity crisis and I'm just talking myself into it just being a very fun experience.
Yeah.
Because it really is stuck with this Mescal character throughout the film. And it clearly wants to go back to Denzel Washington. You can feel the movie wanting to transition to the political backdoor dealings of this movie.
Yeah, it was written for Mescal, but should have been Denzel's.
Totally.
And it is Denzel's.
I mean, that's supposed to be kind of
the problem.
It's supposed to be the David subversion. Yeah. It's supposed to be how Prometheus is Michael Fassbender's movie, and then Alien Covenant is clearly his film.
Yeah.
But that's what he I think he's trying to do that with Gladiator IP. It just doesn't totally work. And again, it's not totally his fault. Like, to be fair, Russell Crowe's Maximus was a character driven by loss and revenge, but he also, what that movie used was the dead wife trope, which is just like a thing that is continuously used and unnecessary in Hollywood at this point, especially. Like, it's just being overused. It happened again with Christopher Nolan's movie with Oppenheimer recently.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a unique problem in his
It's a Nolan and Scott problem. It's even a Denis Villeneuve problem, sort of. But the characterization here just feels even thinner than the Maximus character. The emotionality of the character is just really relying on that tired trope that I'm talking about. So that's probably the most disappointing part of this film.
Yeah, it's almost like his character arc is outdated. So
yes, in the film, again, it feels like it almost knows that, and it continually wants to shift and focus on these supporting characters, particularly Washington, Pascal, Quinn, or even Alexander Karim's character as the medic, Ravi, who I think was a former gladiator.
Yes.
I don't want to spoil anything with that character, but that actor is very good. And just like his conversations with Mescal were more interesting than even Connie Nielsen's conversations with Mescal.
Yeah, surprisingly, right? Yeah, but no, that's not spoiling anything either. And I think that he is another great example of, he was supposed to be written as like a smaller character, but really like shines in his performance. And him and Paul Mescal have this like really like special relationship, and they're talking a lot through their eyes, and definitely have a lot of chemistry.
Yeah.
But of course, I
thought so too.
Like, it's not, that sort of piece of the whole movie isn't really explored. Again, Paul Mescal's character is used for the original beats to kind of galvanize everyone and energize everyone to an ultimate, rebellion of sorts. Again, that's really not spoiling anything. There's like a sort of, a sort of speechifying that he has to do over and over again.
Yeah.
It
gets repetitive.
Yeah. It feels like I like this because I know it's pulling from the original Gladiator, but then again, like, Paul Mescal, why are you?
Yeah. Why are you being forced to do this?
Yeah.
It feels like, I will say this about Mescal. He's in some really fun set pieces, like not just Colosseum set pieces, which are wild. And I'll get to them in my extra credits.
There's great choreography, and he did a great job doing it.
There were like bar brawl-esque fights in this movie, like enclosed rooms with a lot of people in the same room with two guys fighting. And what Mescal was up to felt like we were watching like a John Wick fight sometimes, which I thought was very impressive. I mean, this movie on its own is a historical epic about the legacy of empires that fall and the meaning of empires being built on bloody soil. And we're getting to see a lot of characters kind of grapple with their own role in doing this to Rome and becoming this massive empire, and the ideals of Rome versus the reality of Rome. Like, there are a lot of thematic ambitions that get to shine, but usually they are shining through the supporting characters.
Yeah.
And you're getting supporting characters who seem to be like more self-aware of the movie they're in than the lead character, where you're getting characters like Pedro Pascal's character or Connie Nielsen's or even Denzel's to a certain extent, who are kind of being like, let's interrogate this idea of let's make Rome great again. Yeah. But then the movie, we're not spoiling anything, but the movie does end with a Hollywoodification of its very own ideas.
Yes.
Which feels frustrating.
Felt like it was going
I was underwhelmed.
More interesting. But again, yeah, you're right. It like kind of, it did. I would say that it goes a little bit more to a place that's thematically interesting with like our final speech in the movie. That still feels blockbuster, still feels safe. Yeah. Compared to what they were trying to do, possibly with the Denzel character, and maybe an alternative ending that I would have liked.
Yeah.
But it does feel, strangely in. It's kind of like twisting itself in knots of running with a story that is interesting and ending on that kind of safe note.
Yes, unfortunately. So it's a fascinating addition to Scott's legacy. It's flawed, but ambition, like most of his very good movies, all of those movies that are in that kind of 12 to 6 tier of his great films.
Yeah.
So it is a familiar, frustrating approach to his movies. However, I am still very glad I got to see it in theaters. Like, that's ultimately how I feel. It was a lot of fun.
And the fun thing too is, like, we've already said like some things that happen in the movie that you would think would be spoilers, but there's actually so many twists that are so fun in this movie because of all the supporting characters and how they kind of like intertwine in the story.
Yeah.
And also are pulling on your emotional connection to the previous characters in the first Gladiator, that it makes it so fun. And I don't really feel a drag in the movie. which I did in the first one because it just kind of gets a little slow in the middle. I still enjoy the movie. But this one, it's like, oh, okay, twist. The only new characters shining. Yeah.
The only time where I felt the pace of the movie oddly was in the first 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes is the toughest.
But that's because we were just sticking with Paul Mescal. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as we walk into Rome with Pedro Pascal's character and he's being celebrated and he meets the twin emperors and they're kind of tiffing already. And then we meet Denzel. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
Like, this is a Gladiator 2 sequel. Yes. But I'm also watching somebody make an epic about the fall of Rome and how like the ideal of Rome maybe never existed in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's really cool, especially after watching the first one and are doing our episode on it where we were like, I don't know about this whole Marcus Aurelius speech.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And there's intentional moments with Paul Mescal's writing of like talking about the idea of Rome.
Yes.
And him starting to like, come to terms with the idea of Rome versus the reality of Rome.
But they never doubled down on that at the end. So even though Scott, it's nice to see him re-examining maybe some of his own thematic flaws from his original Gladiator, it doesn't fully develop its own ideas in the sequel, ironically. And I do think that's a studio issue. All right, quickly, extra credits before we get out of here. This is in the trailer, so this is not a major spoiler, but if you don't want to hear any specific plot points about the Colosseum, this is nothing about the characters. It's just like who these gladiators are fighting.
Yeah.
You might want to head out now. Don't forget to leave us a like on this video, comment below what you think about Gladiator 2 and come back after as well. Subscribe to the show too, please. So the Rhino.
The Rhino. Ridley Scott finally got his Rhino. And he also got his ocean.
Yes. So there is a rhino that a bunch of gladiators fight, and it's something that Ridley Scott wanted in the original Gladiator movie, and it cost too much, like millions of dollars to CG the rhino,
and
it looked pretty tough if you watch the behind the scenes. But there was a naval battle that did happen in ancient Rome in smaller colosseums from different emperors throughout different centuries, where they would build small colosseums and then flood these mini colosseums, then have these kind of recreations of naval battles that in Roman history actually occurred. And so we see it in the major Colosseum, the actual legitimate Colosseum. And so it is absurd for anybody who's like a historic, it's kind of a history buff, I guess. But if you're just like taking in the fact that this movie's probably going to inspire more people to learn about ancient history than not, it's kind of like, who cares? And so I loved the naval battle. I loved the rhino stuff.
Yeah, it was fun.
I loved all the fights, really. Yeah. I mean, there were some that were repetitive or went on too long, but I still appreciated them.
Was like, okay, and some of them, it was definitely something that was passed because Ridley Scott was like, I need this in my second Gladiator movie, but
yeah. So that was my extra credits, was the I guess points of comparison between the original Gladiator to this sequel of, could the Gladiator sequel live up to the Colosseum battles? And I think it did.
Interesting. Okay. I think that there were definitely some like really interesting fight sequences in the original, like someone getting like split in half, like intense, there were gruesome, moments. But there were definitely a lot of fun action sequences. And I think the choreography, like we were talking about earlier, adds a lot to that.
That's a good point. This Gladiator sequel felt a little bit more PG-13 than the original. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Even though we have those gruesome moments, I think I remembered asking you when we watched Gladiator for our Patreon episode, I was like, why does this feel like so, kind of safe, even though we're seeing violence? It felt, like a very...
I guess it's because of that absurd tone we keep coming back to. It feels like we're watching Shakespeare more than it does an ancient Rome like epic sometimes.
Yeah, it was like a very family kind of film for the most part. And then for Gladiator 2, I think you're right. That's a great extra credit because I had so much fun during all of those. Like I was just like elbowing you. Mm-hmm. Okay, for me, it's the supporting characters.
Yeah.
And phenomenal. I know that's kind of like a wide net for the extra credits, but I do think that what I walked into this movie thinking was that, of course, I'm going to love Denzel Washington in this, but like I don't know if it's his movie. But I thought it was going to be Paul Mescal's movie as a Maximus continuation.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like, even though I don't agree that he's like what doesn't work, even though I don't think he's like the total right cast in this, maybe he looks like the right cast, but like his energy doesn't match the right cast.
I'm now going to
casting.
Yeah, I'm going to take a step back from what I said and say, actually, it's probably just more the writing.
Yeah.
I think Mescal did really give a strong performance, but the just character is really thinly written.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. But I went into this movie thinking that he was going to be kind of the main crux of this movie. That was thematically interesting, performance-wise interesting. But like you kind of were talking about in terms of what works at the beginning of this is of course, Denzel Washington's performance like really stands out here, and it is his movie. But the Pedro Pascal kind of twist of this film was the most surprising piece to me in terms of the story writing or the like actual writing of the movie. That was really interesting in terms of how it actually built on Maximus's character and pointed out maybe some contradictions that Pedro Pascal's character was aware of that Maximus was written to not be aware of.
Yes.
And then Joseph Quinn, like really bringing in this amazing performance in a really absurd, character that he has to play.
The movie. Yeah.
Like a Commodus, but again, like he has to do something a little bit more absurd than a Commodus figure playing a twin. And he's still able to ground it and really like be in the same room going toe to toe with Washington. So I totally agree with that. But I have to give extra credit to this one sequence of the movie that I can't get out of my mind. And it is like unintentional comedy. Can we go ahead and say like, I guess it's a spoiler for the movie, but it was released in the trailers. Like it was set in the trailers.
If it's set in the trailers, I feel like it's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So if you don't want to know anything about the movie, or you didn't watch the trailer on purpose, go ahead, and come back to the pod after you have watched, the movie in theaters, hopefully. But we learn that Paul Mescal is Maximus's son.
Right.
And is also Connie Nielsen's son, Lucius, who we see in the first movie.
And you don't need a DNA test because there is a sculpture
So
of the family relatives.
This is the sequence that I can't get out of my mind and actually made me laugh out loud in the theater. I wasn't even trying to be annoying. I just thought it was so funny.
I'm glad you brought this up.
Okay, so basically Connie Nielsen and Denzel Washington are like meeting, and even though it was said in the trailer, I was really surprised because a lot of the movie emotionally is running on this idea of Connie Nielsen not knowing that Paul Mescal is Lucius, right? And not knowing that that's her son until we get some reveals of like, different things he's saying that conjure up memories from her in the past. And so when this has not been really revealed to us yet, right?
Yeah.
Denzel and Connie Nielsen are having lunch or something, and they go up to this statue, and Denzel says, "Who is this?" And Connie Nielsen says, "This is like a portrait or a sculpture, right, of Marcus Aurelius, my father, when he was like very young, like in his 20s." And it just pans and holds on this sculpture, and it's just Paul Mescal's face.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It made me laugh. It was just so funny, and I kept laughing about it because I didn't know if it was like unintentional comedy. But it's just Paul Mescal's face.
Well, so you brought this up like mid-movie. You whispered like, I don't think this movie saw the trailer for itself, like for Gladiator 2.
Yeah.
Because audiences went in knowing that if you've seen the trailer, which maybe some people haven't. It's hard to miss trailers now because it's like they're always in your face, whether you're at a theater or you're on your phone scrolling social media. And we try to stay away from them. But the whole big reveal of this movie is that, that is Maximus's son.
Right.
And the movie acts as like this is a big mystery for like an hour and a half into the film.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, okay, I already know, but I'm going to forgive the movie because it's like, it's still fun. Who cares? But yeah, I do think that moment would not have played as comedy if you didn't know. Does that make sense? But because we know that that's actually like Denzel's like transactional relationship with Paul Mescal's character is actually now tied to some kind of like royal bloodline that Denzel is also trying to like
now he's gonna interrogate, like, use this.
Yeah. And he tells me he's like, you're my tool now or whatever.
Yeah.
Instrument. I'm nobody's instrument.
Yeah.
Paul
Mescal's like heated reactions to Denzel also make it feel like weird, like cheesy in moments. But yeah, no, and I think that is interesting because like, I do think that for anyone who did not see the trailer, doesn't know anything about this going in, will have a super fun time with this reveal.
Yes, I do think so.
We'll think, wait, especially because it wasn't totally revealed in the first one that Lucius, it was definitely hinted and strongly suggested, but that was Maximus's plural son.
Yeah. I think it was like the last
plural, his son.
Yeah. I think it was like literally the last thing he said to Connie Nielsen's character was,
he's like, Lucius is safe.
Safe.
Which is supposed to be like his son. Yeah. But I do think like in this one, especially Connie Nielsen having these kind of, she has her wheels turning. Like it's a really great reveal that if you didn't know going in, like I think the movie would really step up in like stars.
The last great thing I'll say about Gladiator 2 is revenge arcs, or like these kind of vengeful arcs that characters like Maximus go on in the original Gladiator are so tired, and like the history of narratives, not just movies.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see Gladiator 2 actually force characters who are trying to seek vengeance, like meet their fate. Like we see everybody who has been wronged in their life, who have been trying to like wrong others because of that, basically meet a fate in this movie, which I do think is an interesting through line of an almost 90-year-old director who's had a very long life of making movies and art about people trying to immortalize themselves in history somehow, whether that means through meeting God or becoming an emperor or tyrant. He constantly comes back to this through line. And I do think it is really interesting that Gladiator 2, even if it does Hollywoodificationize its themes or ideas about legacy and Rome, making Rome great again, all those ideas, it still doesn't let up about that idea of whoever doesn't seek revenge will ultimately be better off. And like that's pretty cool to see in a movie from Ridley Scott, even though I like his darker stuff more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's tough because it doesn't really deliver on like all its themes, so even that gets kind of like complicated. And that I think if this were not in the same like blockbuster mold that it had to be for a Gladiator sequel, it would have actually taken Denzel's character's arc more seriously.
Yeah, that's the major critique.
And there's a piece of that I think would have been like more explored in terms of not just this like strange like switch and then end.
Yes.
And at the end of the movie. But I do think
it does seem like it's sympathizing with a certain point of view in the movie. Yeah. And then it starts being very judgmental of that point of view at the very end. But it's not being judgmental because it has something interesting to say. It is being judgmental because it wants to end and have a Hollywood ending where somebody is superior and wins. And it feels very much like the original Gladiator, where you have somebody kind of looking into the heavens. And
right. But I would say that like there's a kind of like through line of this that is also aware of that. Again, it's like, this idea of like this romanticization or glorification of like a Rome, right? It's like kind of addressing that in Paul Mescal's character.
Certainly,
also Denzel's character. And then again, like we said, kind of like ends with a nice speech and like the first Gladiator.
Yeah, unfortunately. But anyways, had a great time.
Yeah.
If you're watching this review, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments what you thought about Gladiator 2 or what you're excited for in the movie. And especially about Washington's performance and character. Let us know if you also think that's the most compelling character in these two Gladiator films.
Yeah, who is your favorite performance? Because I actually think that there's a toss-up here.
Okay, interesting.
Not for Denzel personally, but I'm saying like toss-up in terms of the supporting characters.
Yeah,
I think the arc was like the most interesting for.
Yeah, give us your ranking of the Gladiator 2 characters. Okay, until next time. See you guys.
Bye.